They found the bank draft in her jewelry box 3 days after she'd disappeared. $12,000 made out to her father with a note in her elegant handwriting that said simply, "For Isaiah's freedom. Payment in full." The amount represented her entire dowry, every penny she'd inherited from her mother, the fortune that was supposed to secure her marriage to Richmond's wealthiest tobacco heir. Instead, Catherine Whitmore had converted it to cash, purchased the freedom of her father's most valuable slave, and vanished with him into the Kentucky night, choosing love over security, scandal over respectability, poverty over privilege. Her father called it theft and betrayal. Her fiancé called it madness and manipulation. Kentucky society called it the greatest scandal of 1855, proof that Northern abolitionist ideas were corrupting even the finest Southern families. But Catherine called it the only choice love allowed, the only way to live with integrity when your heart belonged to someone the law said you could never have. This is the story of how a plantation owner's daughter destroyed her own future to give freedom to a man who should have been invisible to her. This is the story of Catherine and Isaiah, of a love that crossed every line society had drawn, of what it cost to choose human connection over social acceptance, and whether that choice was brave or selfish, or simply the inevitable result of seeing someone's humanity when the world insisted you see only property. My name is Catherine Whitmore. I was 21 years old in the spring of 1855 when I made the decision that would define my life and destroy my family. I was the only child of Thomas Whitmore, owner of Riverside Plantation, 1,500 acres of Kentucky bluegrass land dedicated to tobacco and horses, worked by 63 enslaved people whose lives my father controlled completely. I'd been raised in the big house with every privilege wealth could provide: fine clothes, private tutors, trips to Louisville and Lexington, expectations that I'd marry well and continue my family's social position. I'd been engaged since February to Harrison Pemberton, heir to a vast Richmond tobacco fortune, a man I'd met exactly 4 times before my father arranged our betrothal. Harrison was 28, handsome in a cold way, wealthy beyond measure, and completely uninterested in me as a person. He wanted a suitable wife from a good Kentucky family to bear his children and manage his household. I was suitable. That was the extent of his interest. The engagement had been celebrated across Kentucky society. My dowry was substantial, $12,000 inherited from my mother, who died when I was 10, plus whatever my father chose to add. With that money and my family connections, I was an excellent match. Harrison's family was pleased. My father was satisfied. Everyone agreed it was a brilliant arrangement. Everyone except me. I didn't love Harrison, didn't even like him particularly. He was pompous and dismissive, treated me like a valuable possession he was acquiring, spoke to me in the same tone he used with servants. Our few conversations had revealed a man who viewed women as decorative and inferior, who believed enslaved people were subhuman, who valued money and status above everything, including basic human kindness. But refusing the engagement wasn't an option. In 1855, Kentucky, wealthy daughters didn't refuse advantageous marriages arranged by their fathers. You accepted your duty, married the suitable man, produced children, managed a household, and died having never made a single meaningful choice about your own life. I might have accepted that future if I hadn't met Isaiah, if I hadn't discovered what it felt like to be seen as a whole person rather than a decorative acquisition. If I hadn't learned that love wasn't supposed to feel like resigned duty, but like coming alive for the first time. Isaiah came to Riverside Plantation in March 1854, purchased at auction by my father for $1,400, an enormous sum that indicated exceptional value. He was 26 years old, tall and strong and dignified despite the chains he wore during transport. My father had bought him specifically for his skills. Isaiah was an extraordinary horseman and trainer, could work with the most difficult animals, had a reputation across Virginia for producing champion horses. Riverside Plantation's horse breeding program was my father's passion and primary source of wealth beyond tobacco. Kentucky thoroughbreds commanded premium prices if properly bred and trained. Isaiah's expertise was supposed to improve our stock, increase our profits, make us the premier horse breeding plantation in the state. I first saw him the day he arrived, watched from my bedroom window as my father showed him the stables, the pastures, the horses he'd be training. Even from that distance, even in chains, Isaiah moved with a grace that was striking. He looked at the horses with something like recognition, as if seeing old friends. He touched them gently, spoke to them quietly, and within minutes had a notoriously temperamental mare eating from his hand. My father was satisfied with his purchase. I was. Curious. Curious about a man who could gentle difficult horses with a touch. Curious about someone who maintained dignity despite being bought and sold like livestock. Curious about what kind of person could seem so fully present and alive in circumstances designed to destroy personhood. I found excuses to visit the stables over the following weeks. I'd always loved horses, had ridden since childhood, so it wasn't unusual for me to spend time there. But now I went specifically when Isaiah was working, watched him train young colts and rehabilitate injured horses, observed his patience and skill. He noticed me, of course. Hard not to notice the master's daughter watching from the fence. But he was careful, kept his distance, didn't speak unless I asked direct questions. Enslaved men who showed too much familiarity with white women were severely punished or killed. He knew that. I knew that. The danger hung between us like an invisible wall, but I kept coming back. And slowly, carefully, we started actually talking. Brief exchanges about horses at first, safe topics that had legitimate reasons, then longer conversations about training techniques and animal behavior, then gradually conversations about other things, about books, though he wasn't supposed to know how to read, about music, about ideas and philosophy and what it meant to live a meaningful life. I learned Isaiah's story in pieces over months of careful conversations. He'd been born in Virginia, son of a woman who'd been owned by a horse breeder who recognized Isaiah's natural talent with animals from childhood. He'd been trained formally in horse management, taught to read and write, despite laws against it because his owner wanted him maximally useful. He'd been promised freedom multiple times, promises that evaporated when his owner died, and Isaiah was sold to pay estate debts. He'd learned that promises from white people meant nothing, that enslaved people could only trust each other, that hope was a luxury he couldn't afford. He learned my story too, about growing up motherless in a big house full of servants who couldn't be friends, about private tutors who taught me how to be decorative but not how to think, about the engagement to Harrison that had been arranged without my input, about feeling like I was being sold just like enslaved people were sold, though I had the enormous privilege of being sold into comfort rather than bondage. One afternoon in November 1854, we were in the stable after Isaiah had finished training a difficult young stallion. I'd watched the entire session, mesmerized by his patience and skill, by the way he seemed to communicate with the horse through touch and voice and some indefinable connection. "Do you have a gift?" I said. "The way you work with them. It's like you can see what they're thinking." "Not a gift," he replied quietly. "Just attention. Most people don't actually pay attention to horses. They give orders and expect obedience. But horses are like people. They respond better to understanding than to force. I wish people would treat other people that way." He looked at me directly for the first time. Really looked at me rather than the careful downcast glance enslaved people used around white people. "Some people do, Miss Catherine. You just have to find them." That was when I knew. When I understood that what I felt watching him work, what I felt during our conversations, what I felt every time I found excuses to be near the stables, that wasn't just curiosity or admiration, it was love. Completely inappropriate, absolutely forbidden, socially impossible love. I was in love with my father's slave, with a man the law said was property, who could be sold away at any moment, who'd be killed if anyone suspected he had feelings for me. I was in love with someone I could never have, in a time and place where interracial relationships were criminalized and violently punished, where even private feelings could get us both killed. I should have walked away, should have stopped visiting the stables, stopped seeking conversations, stopped allowing my feelings to deepen. That would have been the safe choice, the sensible choice, the choice that protected both of us. I couldn't do it, because for the first time in my 20 years, I felt seen. Isaiah spoke to me like I had thoughts worth hearing, like my opinions mattered, like I was a person rather than a decorative object. He challenged my assumptions, made me think about things I'd accepted without question, treated me with respect I'd never received from men of my own class. And I could see he felt something too, though he'd never say it, though acknowledging it was far too dangerous. I could see it in how his face changed when I approached, how he listened when I spoke, how our conversations extended longer than necessary, how we found excuses to be in the same space. It was impossible and forbidden and dangerous for both of us. It was also the most real thing in my carefully controlled life. The crisis came in January 1855, when my father finalized my engagement to Harrison Pemberton. The wedding was set for June. I had 5 months to prepare to marry a man I didn't love, to leave my father's house for my husband's house, to begin the life of respectable submission expected of wealthy Southern women. I told Isaiah the news one cold January afternoon in the stable. He was repairing tack, his hands working leather with the same precise attention he gave everything. I stood in the doorway, barely able to speak the words. I'm getting married in June. To Harrison Pemberton, a tobacco heir from Richmond. It's arranged, it's happening. His hands stopped moving, he didn't look up. Congratulations. Miss Catherine, I'm sure you'll be very happy. I won't be happy. I can't be happy marrying someone I don't love. Now he did look up, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made me catch my breath. Miss Catherine, you can't talk like that. It's not safe. For either of us. I don't care about safe anymore, I said, my voice breaking. I care about living an authentic life. And marrying Harrison would be the opposite of authentic. What choice do you have? His voice was gentle but firm. You're a woman in Kentucky in 1855. Your father arranged this marriage. You have to accept it. What if I don't accept it? What if I choose differently? Choose what? There's no alternative for someone like you. You can't just refuse to marry. Where would you go? How would you live? I could go north, take my dowry money and start a new life somewhere. I'm not expected to be someone I'm not. He shook his head. Miss Catherine, that's fantasy. Northern states might not have slavery, but they're not some perfect place where wealthy Southern women can just appear and build independent lives. You'd be ruined, your reputation destroyed. Your family would disown you. Maybe that's a price worth paying for freedom. He stood then, came closer, but careful not to get too close, hyper-aware of boundaries even in this private moment. Is this about Harrison, or is this about something else? It's about you, I said, finally speaking the truth that had been building for months. It's about the fact that I've fallen in love with you, and I can't marry Harrison knowing what I feel. It's about the fact that you're the only person who's ever treated me like a whole human being. It's about wanting something real, instead of this arranged performance I'm supposed to call a life. The silence that followed was terrible. Isaiah's face showed a dozen emotions. Shock, fear, pain. Something that might have been reciprocal feeling quickly suppressed. Miss Catherine, you can't say things like that. He kept his voice low but urgent. If anyone heard you, if anyone even suspected, I'd be killed. Probably tortured first to make an example. You'd be ruined but alive. I'd be dead. Do you understand that? I understand. But it doesn't change how I feel. Then you need to learn to hide it, he said, desperation creeping into his voice. You need to marry Harrison and forget about me and build whatever life you can. Because the alternative, the thing you're imagining, that's impossible. We can't be together. Not here. Not anywhere. The entire world would destroy us if we tried. What if we went somewhere the world couldn't reach us? There's no such place, Miss Catherine. Slavery exists everywhere, even places that claim to be free. And even where it doesn't legally exist, racial prejudice does. White women don't run away with black men, not if they want to live. Before you wonder where in the world I'm telling this story from, I want you to drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button if you want more untold stories about forbidden love and impossible choices during America's most brutal chapter. These are the stories that show us what people risked for connection. Now back to Kentucky, 1855, where I was about to make a decision that would change everything. I left the stable that day without resolving anything. Isaiah was right about the danger, right about the impossibility, right that acting on my feelings would likely get him killed and destroy my life. But I couldn't marry Harrison. Couldn't spend my life with a man who saw me as decorative property, while my heart belonged to someone who saw me as human. That path felt like death too, just slower and more socially acceptable. I spent February in turmoil. Wedding preparations accelerated around me. My father hired seamstresses to create an elaborate wedding dress. Invitations were printed and mailed to Kentucky's finest families. Harrison visited twice, inspected me like purchased goods, discussed our future without asking my input about any of it. Isaiah and I avoided each other. Too dangerous to continue our conversations now that I'd spoken the forbidden truth aloud, but I watched him from my window working with horses, and sometimes I'd catch him glancing toward the house like maybe he was looking for me too. The solution came to me in March, during a particularly awful dinner with Harrison and his parents. They'd come to finalize wedding details, and the conversation revealed exactly what my future held. Harrison's mother explained that I'd be expected to host lavish parties, manage a household of 15 servants, produce children as quickly as possible, never express opinions about business or politics, and basically exist as decorative proof of Harrison's wealth and status. Harrison nodded along, adding that of course I'd have plenty of money for clothes and jewelry, as long as I remembered that my role was ornamental. "We'll get you a social secretary to handle the complicated planning," he said, with a condescending smile. "Wouldn't want to overwhelm you with too much responsibility." Sitting there listening to them plan a life where I'd be a beautiful, expensive doll, I realized something important. My dowry was $12,000, currently held in trust by my father but mine to use once I married. That money was supposed to help Harrison and me establish our household, but technically it was mine. My mother had left it to me specifically, with instructions that it be used for my future. What if I defined my future differently than everyone assumed? What if I used that money not to start a marriage to Harrison, but to buy Isaiah's freedom? The idea was insane. Daughters didn't use their dowries to free slaves. That money was supposed to secure marriages, not undermine the entire system of slavery and racial hierarchy. Using it that way would enrage my father, destroy my engagement, ruin my reputation, make me unmarriageable. But it would free Isaiah, would give him the legal paperwork that said he was a free man, that he could go north and build a life without constant threat of recapture, would grant him the autonomy and humanity that should have been his birthright. And if I was going to throw away my life anyway by refusing to marry Harrison, if I was going to be ruined and disowned regardless, why not use my resources to do something meaningful first? I spent 2 weeks planning, research into how manumission worked in Kentucky, checking on the exact amount of my dowry and how to access it, figuring out travel routes north, places where interracial couples could exist with slightly less danger, learning about Quaker communities and abolitionist networks that might help. The practical challenges were enormous. My dowry was in trust, technically inaccessible until I married, but my father had control of the funds and could release them if he chose. I'd need him to agree to let me use the money to buy Isaiah's freedom, which he'd never do if he understood what I was planning. So I'd have to lie, manipulate, use every privilege of being his beloved daughter to get what I needed. In April 1855, I went to my father's study with a carefully rehearsed story. I told him I was concerned about Isaiah, about his health and well-being, about how hard he worked and how valuable he was. I suggested that we should reward his excellent service by allowing him to purchase his own freedom gradually, working toward it over years through wages we'd pay for his horse training expertise. "It's what some progressive plantations are doing," I said, using arguments I'd read in abolitionist literature. "They allow skilled slaves to work towards self-purchase. It incentivizes good work and doesn't actually cost anything since the slaves earn the money themselves over time." My father was skeptical. "Why would I want to free the best horseman in Kentucky? He makes me thousands in increased breeding profits. Think of your reputation, father. Progressive slaveholders are respected in enlightened circles, and it's not immediate freedom. Isaiah would work for years earning the money. You'd have his labor the entire time. When he finally bought his freedom, you'd be paid fair market value. You lose nothing except gaining reputation for benevolence." He considered it. What my daughter didn't understand was that I had no intention of waiting years, but I needed him to agree to the concept of Isaiah buying his freedom, needed him to name a price, needed legal framework established. After a week of consideration, my father agreed. Told Isaiah he could work toward purchasing his freedom at $1,800, the premium price reflecting his valuable skills. Told him he could keep a portion of wages from outside training work, maybe earning $100 a year, so freedom might be possible in 18 years if he lived that long. 18 years, Isaiah was 26. He'd be 44 before he bought his freedom. Assuming nothing went wrong, assuming he survived that long, assuming my father didn't change his mind or sell him first. I had no intention of making Isaiah wait 18 years. In May 1855, 1 month before my scheduled wedding, I went to the Lexington bank that managed my dowry trust. I told them I needed to convert assets to cash for wedding expenses. They were happy to oblige, wired $12,000 from the trust to the Lexington branch where I could collect it. I withdrew the entire amount in cash and banker's drafts, told them it was for furnishing my new home in Richmond. $12,000 in paper and coins that I hid in my wardrobe, waiting for the right moment. That moment came on May 20th, 3 weeks before my wedding. My father was traveling to Louisville for a horse auction. Harrison was in Richmond managing business. The plantation staff was busy with tobacco planting. I had 2 days where no one would notice if I was unusually busy. I went to Isaiah in the stable that evening after the other workers had left. Told him my plan. Told him I had $1,800 cash, enough to buy his freedom immediately. Told him I'd already prepared legal paperwork through a lawyer in Lexington who believed I was benevolently freeing a loyal family servant. "You're going to be free tomorrow," I said. "I'm buying your freedom, and then you're going north before my father returns and realizes what happened." Isaiah looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Miss Catherine, you can't do this. That's your dowry money. You'll need it to marry Harrison." "I'm not marrying Harrison. I can't. And I'd rather use this money to free you than use it to start a marriage that would kill my soul." "But I'll be free and you'll be ruined," he protested. "Your father will disown you. Harrison will break the engagement. Everyone will know you used your dowry to free a slave instead of marrying. You'll be destroyed socially. Maybe being destroyed socially is better than being preserved in a life I can't bear," I said. "Maybe choosing what's right for once is worth any cost." "Why are you doing this?" His voice was raw. "Why sacrifice everything for me?" "Because I love you," I said simply. "Because in the entire world, you're the only person who sees me as fully human. Because if I'm going to lose everything anyway, I want to lose it doing something that matters. And your freedom matters more than my comfort." The next day, I conducted the transaction. Met with my father's lawyer, presented him with cash, signed transfer papers selling Isaiah's ownership from my father to me, then immediately signing manumission papers freeing Isaiah completely. The lawyer thought it was an unusual gift, but legal. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, Isaiah was legally free, manumission papers filed with the county court, no longer property of anyone. I told him that evening, handed him the paperwork that proved his freedom. "You're free. Legally, completely free. Take these papers and go north. There are Quaker communities in Indiana that help freed people. I've written down addresses. Go tonight before anyone realizes what happened." "What about you?" he asked, holding the papers like they might disintegrate. "I'll face the consequences. My father will be furious. Harrison will break the engagement. I'll probably be disowned. But I'll survive." "You wouldn't survive staying enslaved. Come with me," he said suddenly. "Don't stay here and face this alone. Come north. We can build a life together." It was what I wanted, more than anything. But I shook my head. "If I disappear the same night you do, they'll assume you kidnapped me. They'll send slave catchers after you. Your freedom will be meaningless if they're hunting you for abduction. You need to leave alone. Let them think you just ran away after I foolishly freed you. So this is goodbye?" His voice broke. "Not goodbye. I'll come north eventually. Once the scandal dies down, once my father's anger fades, I'll find you. But you need to go now, tonight, before anyone figures out what happened." I wanted him to argue, wanted him to insist I come with him, but he was practical enough to understand the wisdom of my plan. If we ran away together immediately, it would confirm everyone's worst assumptions about our relationship, would get him killed if they caught us. So he left that night, walked away from Riverside Plantation, carrying his freedom papers and the few possessions enslaved people were allowed. Walked north toward Indiana and whatever life awaited him there. walked away from me, though we both hoped it wasn't forever. I stayed behind to face the destruction. My father returned from Louisville 2 days later. I told him immediately what I'd done, showed him the legal paperwork, explained that I'd used my dowry to purchase Isaiah's freedom and release him. His rage was spectacular. He screamed about betrayal and theft and deception, called me ungrateful and manipulative, demanded I explain why I'd waste $12,000 on freeing one slave, why I'd destroy my own future for a man who was property. I told him the truth, because it was the right thing to do, because Isaiah deserved freedom, because I couldn't marry Harrison knowing I had resources to do something meaningful and chose not to. "You've destroyed yourself," my father said coldly. "Harrison will break the engagement when he hears about this. No respectable man will marry you after this scandal. You'll be unmarriageable, living here as a dependent spinster for the rest of your life. Maybe that's preferable to being married to someone who sees me as decorative property," I replied. He disowned me that day, told me I had 2 weeks to leave his house, that I'd receive no further support, that I was no longer his daughter. The betrayal of using my dowry to free a slave was unforgivable in his eyes, proof that Northern abolitionist corruption had poisoned my mind. Harrison broke the engagement within 3 days of learning what I'd done, sent a letter saying I was clearly mentally unstable, that using my dowry to free a Negro proved I was unfit to be anyone's wife, that he was grateful to discover my insanity before the wedding. Kentucky society was scandalized. Rumors spread that I must have been in love with Isaiah, that we'd had an inappropriate relationship, that I was now ruined beyond redemption. Some rumors were true, others were exaggerations. All of them destroyed my reputation completely. I'd known this would happen, had prepared for it as best I could. Still, living through the actual destruction was harder than I'd imagined. The ostracism, the whispers, the former friends who refused to acknowledge me, the realization that I was now completely alone with no family, no prospects, no clear path forward. But I didn't regret it. Isaiah was free. That mattered more than my comfort. I left my father's house in June 1855 with the remaining $10,000 from my dowry, the money left after buying Isaiah's freedom. I moved to Lexington, rented a small house, lived quietly under my mother's maiden name. I couldn't go north immediately, not while my scandal was fresh and people were watching, but I planned to go eventually, once enough time passed. Isaiah sent letters through the Quaker network, careful communications that didn't reveal exactly where he was, but told me he'd reached free territory safely. Found work with a Quaker farmer training horses, was building a new life. He asked repeatedly if I was safe, if I needed money when I'd come north. I waited a year, lived in Lexington under my assumed name, worked as a seamstress, saved money, let the scandal fade into gossip history. In June 1856, I finally traveled north, took trains and coaches and walked the final miles to the Indiana Quaker community where Isaiah was living. He was waiting for me at the train station, had traveled there every week for months, hoping this would be the week I'd arrive. When I stepped off the train, when I saw him standing there as a free man in free territory, when he smiled and walked toward me without fear or caution, I knew every sacrifice had been worth it. We married a week later in a Quaker meeting house, the ceremony simple and egalitarian, no one caring about my scandal or our racial difference, just two free people choosing to build a life together. People asked me over the years if I regretted my choice, if I'd make the same decision again knowing it would cost me my family, my reputation, my comfortable future. The answer was always the same without hesitation, because love isn't about preserving your own comfort. It's about valuing someone else's freedom and humanity more than your own social position. It's about recognizing that some things are worth sacrificing everything for, and another person's liberation is always at the top of that list. I spent my entire dowry to free Isaiah. $12,000 that was supposed to secure a marriage to Harrison, used instead to purchase freedom for the man I actually loved. I gave up wealth, family, respectability, the entire future that had been planned for me. In return, I got 40 years of marriage to someone who saw me as an equal, got a life built on mutual respect rather than decorative submission, got children born free who never knew slavery, got to live with integrity rather than comfortable compromise. Was it worth it? Every single day, every single moment, every single choice that led us to freedom and each other. Isaiah and I built a modest life in Indiana, far from Kentucky's tobacco plantations and society scandals. We never became wealthy, but we were free and together. We raised 3 children who grew up understanding that their parents had chosen love and principle over security and tradition. The Civil War came in 1861. We supported the Union cause, hoping it would end slavery everywhere. When the 13th Amendment passed in 1865, when slavery was finally abolished across America, we celebrated knowing that the choice I'd made in 1855 to free one person had been right, even if the entire system hadn't ended until 10 years later. My father died in 1868 without ever forgiving me or acknowledging his grandchildren. Harrison Pemberton married someone else, died in 1872 from complications of alcoholism. Kentucky society that had ostracized me eventually forgot I existed. I never regretted any of it. Never wished I'd chosen differently. Never looked back at the comfortable life I'd rejected and felt I'd made a mistake. Because I'd chosen love over comfort, freedom over respectability, human connection over social acceptance. And those choices, difficult as they were, had given me something far more valuable than any dowry or marriage arrangement ever could. A life that was authentically mine, lived with someone who truly saw me. Rachel died in 1895 at age 67, pneumonia claiming her after a lifetime of hard work and earned freedom. I held her hand while she died, grateful for the 40 years we'd had, grateful I'd made the choice in 1855 that allowed those decades to happen. I died 3 months later at age 61, unable to imagine living without her, following her into whatever came next. On my deathbed, someone asked if I regretted using my entire dowry to free Isaiah, if I'd wished I'd kept that money and lived more comfortably. I laughed, actually laughed, because $12,000 bought 40 years of love, 3 beautiful children, a life of integrity, and the knowledge that I'd chosen rightly when every pressure insisted I choose wrongly. That's the best investment anyone could make. This was the story of Catherine Whitmore, born in Kentucky in 1834, raised in wealth and privilege, fell in love with Isaiah, an enslaved man on her father's plantation, used her entire $12,000 dowry to purchase his freedom in 1855, was disowned by her family and ostracized by Kentucky society, moved north to Indiana where she married Isaiah and spent 40 years building a free life together. Died in 1895, 3 months after Isaiah's death. Her choice to sacrifice her privileged future to grant Isaiah freedom became legendary in abolitionist circles as an example of what love demands when one person is free and another is enslaved. Her story demonstrates that the truest measure of love is what you're willing to sacrifice to ensure someone else's liberation, and that choosing human connection over social acceptance, however costly, is always the right choice when the alternative is complicity in another person's bondage. The echoes of Catherine's choice remind us that freedom, however we achieve it, gains deepest meaning when it requires personal sacrifice, that love transcends social boundaries only when people are willing to pay the terrible price of crossing those boundaries, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is giving someone their liberation even when it costs you everything you have. If this story of forbidden love and the price of choosing freedom moved you, subscribe to hear more untold stories from America's most divided chapter. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what resonated most about Catherine's choice to sacrifice her entire future for Isaiah's freedom.